Hey everybody, I'm Sean Robinson,
I'm Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line.
and a very special guest today, somebody that we have been trying to get on the horn for quite a while. Unfortunately, we don't all have the same horns, so it took a while to actually make the connection happen. Dash, how you doing?
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on your channel and everything.
Of
Cool.
course. You're joining us from we know from our prior conversation, joining us from the Blue Room. Uh,
Yeah. The funky storage room.
I think we all have a funky storage room in our lives, and I have
No, it
mine
kind of looks
more.
like it's gonna topple onto me, but it's not. It's okay.
You're not
So
doing like the funky comic art storage room, right? Unless it looks like there's a lot of paper and books and stuff about to topple on you. Yeah.
Yeah.
action figures, preferably as well, if you have a few there. But specifically, we were talking to you on the occasion of the release, literally today, I believe, the day that we're recording this, of your new book, Blurry, which has been a long time coming, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I mean, they've been taking longer and longer to make. But when I started that, I didn't have a child, and now my daughter's 7.
Oh, wow.
So, you know,
That gives you an
I
awful lot of
didn't. I
perspective.
I used to I used to write dates of how I started around this time, and I would do that, and but then it just started feeling embarrassing, and so I stopped. Or it almost felt like I was trying to, like, I don't know, at like I just stopped doing it because no one cared. You shouldn't care.
Well, yeah, a project like that takes place in creation over such a long period of time has to then allow for a lot of change in viewpoint as you're going. I'm assuming, and given the structure of the book, I'd be curious to hear like how that influenced the book, it being something that you're working on over such a long period and such a long period of growth going from not being a father to being a father of a 7-year-old.
I would. It sounds kind of like technical, although you guys are probably would be interested in. I would uh, I would read. I did a lot of redrawing, so I would redraw things in the beginning of the book to match things that I discovered as I was in the latter half of the book. So I would keep setting up things that could kind of ping pong back and forth, and even just things like, okay, this because I put character guides at the beginning of the book, but for a while I wasn't really sure if I had was going to do that, because I felt like part of the fun of the book was like you just didn't know who it was going to follow, and like as you're
Mhm.
reading into it, you're like, any of these people in any panel, like we could just dive into them and they could have some whole other thing going on. But as you guys know from doing comics, is like, people might only glance at a character, so you need to give them an eye patch or weird nose or something to keep people recognizable. So I did a lot of things like make only put this one kind of pattern on this one shirt for this person's character, and I can put that here and then do it later in the book, and we kind of know, then they go to a wedding, so they're all wearing these different things. So like, well, if I put the pattern of the shirt from the guy onto his tie, then maybe we'll glancingly know that that is the same character as here. I'm not sure how much it really. I did a lot of things just to make it not confusing. The halftone washes really helped that. Like, okay, there's only one character with just no wash tone hair or something, and just these kind of cartooning tricks to make it all, because it's a rambling thing, but ideally you feel like you're in cartooning 101 clarity, good hands in that department.
Right, because we should say the narrative structure of the book is very unusual. I was trying to think of examples of this structure, and not finding very many in comics, and just a handful in film. But the essentially like a group anthology format, where you feel almost like you're reading an anthology at first, because you slip so easily between different characters and their experiences, but then you slowly start to get your footing and realize that you're essentially being transferred back and forth between these different narrators. And
Yeah, I mean, that was like, ideally when it starts, you're like, oh, okay, this is just gonna kind of hop, and it's just almost like automatic writing or something, like, okay, they're going to the grocery store or something, and you're hot and you're moving from one to the other. And then I hope a little bit before the halfway point, you're like, oh, these things are kind of starting to feel like they are related to each other. Or I tried to put things in the first half of the book of even just people like at one point someone's like, I'm halfway through all of these different books, but I always finish them. And I felt like it was kind of like I was trying to say, like, I am gonna like get back to this stuff. So then if you get to the halfway point, then the rest of the time it should be really, really fun, because you're like, oh, what I thought was this rambling thing was actually this clockwork thing that is then zooming out. And I thought of it less as like moving between people and more as like one continuous thing, where almost like that Charles and Ray Eames short, The Powers of 10. Did you ever see that?
Yeah,
it's
where
like
you zoom.
one long zoom in and then one long zoom out, and that it's like keeping it for I think the just that every page was the same layout, I think kind of helped that feeling of like one continuous thing. I don't, it's all like pretty intuitive, but you guys read a lot of comics. I'm sure you kind of get that if you like section it off, it kind of makes a rhythm that where you're not kind of reorienting yourself at every page. Even that split second of like, oh, that one panel is bigger, or now I have to go there, would maybe interrupt that like zoom in, zoom out feeling.
That was one of the things that really struck me reading that book, because I'll admit, I think I'm a pretty OCD fan of yours. I really enjoy what a formalist you are, but that you're always using it for story. So I was really struck by that 4-panel grid. And you said earlier in the interview, you said, oh, like the cartooning will kind of hold your hand or something like that. It will help you along because you wanted that clarity. And I was struck by the fact that, oh, he's not doing any like comics visual formalism in this one. All of the formalisms in the expand and contract writing was that seems like that was a pretty intentional decision on your part to keep the visuals out of that realm for this one.
It depends on how you define formalism, or like some, it's not ideally anyone could, I guess sometimes I would do things that in retrospect are like kind of abrasive, but at the time didn't seem, I didn't think of it that way.
Within Blurry
Yeah,
or within
like,
other works?
I think what you mean is that it seems like less abrasive. The book I did kind of during this discipline, you could say like those layouts were pretty confusing, but sometimes because they didn't have any panel borders, they were floating around. But that was kind of edited in the same way that you would edit something that's in a fixed panel layout, because when nothing has a border, I could stick things in and move it around. So having no borders and having a fixed border both equaled something malleable in an edit, where I could combine drawings that were done years apart. Other people may disagree, but with discipline, I thought, oh, this will be easy. Like, you don't even have to know how to read comics to read this thing. There's basically no word balloons. You just float through it, and I'm telling the eye where to go at every panel. So I didn't think of that one as, but other people told me, that book's not the easiest. I don't know. I think mainly, honestly, people would just tell me that the handwriting is hard to read in discipline, the cursive handwriting. But so much of the looking at letters and diary entries from that time was handwriting that was cursive, that was like that, and it felt like so much of the research was looking at cursive handwriting. I felt like it was one of the first ideas for the book, was that it would have handwriting like that saying, and the words were things that I plucked from actual letters and diary entries. So all this, you know, I could like provide excuses for the different books, but there was some kind of reasoning behind each one.
Well, I'm going to push back against you anyway, Carson, because I think that all of there's a lot of formal play inside of the book that's not just narrative. I think that it's all just within the constraint of the 4-panel grid. Like for instance, there's the scene where he can't hear what the people are saying, and he's imagining the students. There's a character who's a life drawing model, and he's imagining what the students are saying, and you present all of the students with word balloons that are blank. Very small example of a formal conceit that I've never seen before, but it's really narratively clear. There's also the repeated device of someone showing them an image on their phone or capturing an image in photo form, and then the image itself being presented as the panel immediately following that.
Usually it's usually like, well, how do you express something? And so you try to come up with some graphic thing for it, and it's not like in one scene in this book, a character's tipsy, and so like someone's saying something, but the words are just, you'd have to turn the book to read it. The words are not, you know, right to left. They're tipped.
Yeah.
I thought, like, should I put that in? Is that gonna kind of throw off the rules of the book? It's the only time I do that. But then I thought people know what it's like to be drunk, and they will read it and immediately get that, you know, just by turning the words, you're kind of communicating that feeling, and it didn't seem too obvious, or it's all intuitive, I guess.
It's interesting that you say that intuitive, because a lot of your books, this one included, you use that word of like clockwork mechanism too, that as you pull back out, you kind of start to see this clockwork mechanism. It's interesting to hear someone whose work I associate with that kind of very careful, thoughtful planning, then say it's totally intuitive. Is that's something that's always applying for your work? Or you kind of picking and choosing approaches per project?
The structure of this book is very like we've been talking, very like tight, or like, you know what it is, or like anyone flipping through the book can see that, okay, every page is going to be the same. Ideally, that's to allow for the characters to be complicated, or, you know, do these other things that I wanted to kind of put all of my thinking into what was happening in the panels, meaning what the characters are doing. And
so I'm assuming that you roughed this entire book out, given how complex the plotting and the writing is. Is that the case, or and if so, was that all done prior to any finished drawing being completed?
I would kind of rough it in sections, but again, because I was drawing it in this fixed way, I could come up with ideas and substitute out panels and kind of shift things around. And so things can look more planned than they are. You know, it's kind of an illusion to make it, to ideally, like, you make something that, and it has some kind of sense of authority, or to me, the book feels like it's coming from the people, and they're all interested in these different things, and so it's not so much like a formalist game like some of like the Oulipo writing, where you're just kind of like, okay, this person has some weird rule that is some mathematical thing, and you're seeing them play the game. I didn't want it to feel like that. I wanted it to be like, what people like about the book is the characters and the scenes, and but that there's something satisfying about that it being all in this zoom in, zoom out.
It seems like having that kind of constraint that you're talking about as not the focus of the book, but like a structure to improv over, sounds like that allowed you to then let the characters take on that improvisational role.
Yeah, sometimes when things feel like form first, you're like, okay, these people are just cardboard cutouts that are moving through a structure, and you sense that, especially in movies that have a 3-act structure. You're like, okay, this character is just being shuffled through, like, this character at the 10-minute mark is saying that he doesn't want to take the mission, but we know he's going to take the mission, and he has to be shuffled through the guideposts of these stories. Obviously there's something maybe even kind of funny and sad about that feeling of seeing someone being shuffled through a structure when it's done kind of knowingly. But I think everyone would kind of agree that it feels better when the characters are dictating the structure, and it feels like people are doing. And especially with Blurry, I feel like part of the joke of the book is that it's at least kicked off by very minor, a tiny indecision, a tiny moment of indecision between two different kinds of dress shirts. And so it's a little funny how much it's diving into indecision based on the smallest thing.
Yeah, and I think if you had a formal constraint version of this that was not necessarily led by the characters, but had essentially like the same thing in a full on restraint fashion, it would probably look like what's the first Richard Linklater movie where everybody is a stranger and it takes place within an entire day, and you go from character to character, but they don't know each other. It'll be like somebody bumps into somebody else.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Slacker, right? It's
Thank
like
you. Yeah.
It's like a baton pass.
Right, and oftentimes, as satisfying as that movie can be, and obviously it's like, I think it's fantastic from a certain perspective, but it's also, you always are waiting for the moment where it's significant, like you're waiting for the moment where the trick turns into something that's meaningful. Whereas I think that
I haven't seen that movie in a long time, but a couple of people had mentioned it in relation to this. But in my mind, that baton pass is different than going in and then coming out, because I also feel like part of, ideally, the fun of the book is that each of the characters have heard the story from the previous person.
Right.
So then it could have been something where it's like, okay, in the middle, they decide to go with their gut or something. And that'll be the lesson of the book. You go with your gut and you see how everyone decides, well, Billy went with his gut, so Sally will go with his gut. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be like, well, this character doesn't do this thing, and so this other character thinks, well, maybe I should do this thing. It didn't work out for this other person, so it kind of ideally ping pongs back where everyone is sort of responding to the story in a different way. So because I feel like that's more how someone can try to give you advice, but ultimately everyone decides on their own, and how they roll with their advice changes person to person.
So I want to ask you about specifically about Blurry in terms of how you take the sort of raw materials of observation and turn it into these like really intensely feel like really intensely observed characters. I'm going to give you a quick anecdote. I was a life model for a year, and all of those scenes are so hyper real to me. It was actually giving me the sweats. Specifically, people the parts of the realizing that people are always looking at your physicality or working through some type of problem and not actually looking at you or perceiving you as an individual, and that being a source of anxiety that can turn into something else. That was so like well observed, it made me wonder like what the sort of process was that you had of sifting through your raw materials and turning that into a fictional narrative. I mean, do these all things kind of like collect onto the project once you have them to hang on? Are these observations you're making all the time? Do you keep journals, or what is it? How was your process of gathering these kinds of
well, I was a figure drawing model too.
Okay.
For many years out of SVA, and I kind of, the teacher wasn't a teacher at SVA, but it was a teacher, and he's since passed away kind of recently. That was kind of like this guy who was sort of like from another time. Like he maybe didn't have like a funny mustache like that, but he kind of talked and acted like he was like from some other time. And that, you know, there were other models that were kind of like this guy that's the figure drawing in the book. So I kind of would take some things that where I knew what it's like, and some things from other people that I knew. And it kind of goes into some blender where it has to be like enough me, but also enough of the other person that it's more, or I don't know, it's just because you know, obviously part of it is, and the book has this too, where you're sort of wondering how much your experience is like another person's experience.
Right.
You know, I don't have an answer for that, but you can do things that are writing or cartooning tricks is the only word that comes to mind, but that sounds bad. But like, for example, you know, I'll do things where like a character has a word balloon or a thought balloon, and it's just my brother. That's all it's saying. So we get that character's thinking about their brother. And anyone who's had a brother has thought about their brother. And I don't have to be some kind of writing empathy genius to enter this other person's consciousness to write in their head of what exactly they're thinking about their brother. But you do kind of get the feeling of entering that other person and them thinking about their brother. So it's sort of like an abbreviated cartooning shorthand that somehow opens things up instead of reducing it down. And there's, you know, figure drawing is like that too. Like I don't know what it's like to be in your body, but I know what it's like to have to hold still and stare at a spot on the floor and sweat and wonder what other people are thinking about you. And all of those things I feel like are pretty close. And I think all of the characters have some part of that where it's 50-50 me and someone I knew, or 60-40, or, you know, something. And it was often maybe okay, I have kind of enough scenes about this particular thing, and it kind of relates to another part in the story, so it feels like it belongs in this book.
I like that you use the word empathy, because one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, I mean, you know, you have what seems to be on its face to be a very empathetic kind of story, and essentially each of these characters, we're entering into the thing that they're telling the next person to do. And it seems to me that this kind of fiction in general is a type of empathetic act, in that you're having to picture yourself as the person that you're writing about, as opposed to like autobiographical writing or something like that, where it's sort of the inverse of that. Do you think
I think to read between the lines and what you're saying,
yeah.
I feel like when you read Blurry, you can tell that I like all of the people. Right. And that this is not a misanthropic book at all. That even when the characters do things that you disagree with, like, it's got a very sweet tone. It's not, yeah, I kind of think that's maybe what you're saying, right?
Yeah, no, it is what I'm saying. But it's also that there's a certain, I don't even know exactly what, but are comics themselves like capable of a different kind of empathy as a communication medium than other kinds of fiction, or is just a different set of tools to exploit? If you're drawing a picture that accompanies a story versus writing a narrative versus filming something, is it just a different kind of empathy that's required to make something that's satisfying in this kind of emotional way, as opposed to, like you said, following genre conventions or something like that, where
if that's what the cartoonist is trying to do or is going for, it's great. You know, a lot of comics are kind of going for like, not all, but some autobio comics are kind of like the person is the victim of the world, and that everyone is against them, and it's kind of painting that picture of the often, I feel like it's almost like a Charlie Brown point of view, where like the world is happening to me and I'm not so they can draw things to reinforce that point of view. But they could just, if the cartoonist had a different point of view, it would be something different. And similarly with prose, can like really directly kind of replace your thinking as the words kind of enter your head, and it feels very internal, and everyone's read a book and felt like they were that character. And it's so exciting to read a book that was written 100 years ago and be like, this person feels like just like me, like I'm just having the same thoughts as this person. And that's so cool. I mean, I feel like I've had lots of people have had that. That's one of the great things about books. And in movies, I feel like usually you're kind of looking at something happening, and it's a more external experience. I don't really know if it's like medium to medium. I think of it more as like the artist to the artist, what's their perspective, and how good are they at communicating that worldview. Because some people are incredible at communicating a worldview that I don't have, and I like that, because then I get to kind of know where they're coming from, but still kind of ultimately I think, well, I don't really see the world this way. I just kind of like to dip into this person's weird POV.
And in doing that in a way where it's not autobiography, but you are relying on your own experiences, and you're saying, oh, well, it's a 50-50 mix or 40-60 or whatever. I feel like that opens the empathy up for you as the writer, for the audience even more. And then, like, even for the writer, you're understanding yourself a little bit more, maybe because you do have that 40% mix in with your 60, kind of judging it from the outside. It seems, rather than the person who is going to do the straight autobio and the world's against me, where you're not letting anyone out and it is pure autobio, it seems like that's actually a way to grow personally as the author yourself.
I think it's also maybe just being interested in other people, and like that teacher that I had was such a weird, funny character, and so I thought it would be, for each of the characters in the book, I thought it that there was something about them that was interesting. There's an author character in this book, and obviously I'm an author, and a lot of those things I know what it's like. Part of it is that she's like a YA author, and I kind of know some people like a little bit like that, or I've met people, and making it them, I feel like, was an interesting, not exercise, but I was kind of interested in an author who wasn't me, and someone who dives into a kind of fiction that's not like, and also, that character is much more like just successful than me, and like I kind of know what it's like to be successful from a few things here and there, but I don't know what it's like to be especially to have a very successful like pseudonym like this character, like kind of like a YA, like a almost like a Lemony Snicket, or like a fictional being. But I've known my friend created Kim Kardashian, and I illustrated the Kim Kardashian book, and he would tell me kind of what that was like, where people would write him and he knew how that character would respond through Twitter. And I don't, so there were just other things outside of myself that were interesting. But one thing that popped into my head while you were talking, one time Lars von Trier said, it's a great exercise in writing to defend a position that you don't believe in. And which is a very, if you know his movies, is a very like funny thing for him to say, and kind of like clarifies the tone of his movies, which are often pretty effed up. But you also sense that in like Michelle Houellebecq or something, these kind of authors that have like a very, you sense that maybe you don't know how much they're actually believe in what they're saying. It's kind of partly some kind of weird exercise, or even like there's a sense of humor in having such a dark worldview that's maybe is 60% real from them, but
yeah, I mean, I think we wouldn't be asking about these things if it wasn't for just like, I don't often read fiction in the comics sphere these days where it seems like the generous view of all the characters, where there's an attempt to give everybody their own humanity. And I mean, I think that's the super successful part, of this book from my perspective.
Thanks. But, there's like the whole tradition of like caricature, you know, mocking people in some kind of way. But then there's also like bringing out someone's idiosyncrasies. And so I always liked Zawalski, you know, that artist, you know who I'm talking about? There was a documentary about him on Netflix or something, but he did portraits of people. Zawalski, I think his name was. But he's kind of, you can tell that he's who Drew Friedman was kind of looking at. And it's like pointillist caricature artwork, stippling faces. I think you can see that Zawalski was kind of heightening people's idiosyncrasies. And even if all of this kind of caricature art of mocking people came out of it, there was still, that was maybe a misinterpretation of some of the things in Zawalski and in Friedman. I think Friedman likes some of those people more than it looks like Drew Friedman.
Yeah.
But and then of course, you know, like political cartooning can be used to like just make fun of people and simplify things. But cartooning can, I don't think there's something specific to cartooning that is that. I think that's just the people's perspective.
And can you dig into what you mean by cartooning? Because I will admit that as you're talking, you're expanding my mind about cartooning into the realm of writing as well, which I'd never considered. But when you're saying like having someone think my brother, that's like a cartooning trick in writing, if I'm understanding you right. So could you expand on what you mean by cartooning and how you think about that?
I'm using it in some bonkers way
It's
that's
probably really
specific to me.
interesting.
So no, I
Yeah.
mean, you know, I don't like, to me, like you could write, they were thinking about their brother, something like a prose author could do that. For some reason, a thought balloon and writing my brother in it, and that just being it, is a cartooning thing, because that's almost like an Ernie Bushmiller thing of like a very abbreviated form of talking. So it's
Yeah.
like a cartooning language thing of using 2 words instead of 20 to because you have to fit it into a word balloon.
So a
But
form of
the
abbreviation or
and
shorthand.
yeah, and I guess when I was talking about cartooning with the caricature, it's just like line drawings, you know. You know, a great example is the perfect example, I think, caricature that is humane as opposed to mocking is Al Hirschfield, right? And like those are just the the personality being celebrated in a goofy, exaggerated fashion, but you can tell that he loves those people. And like his drawing of Sigourney Weaver and all, you know, they're full of affection in a way that is all equaling something that's slightly funny and reduced and exaggerated.
You know, I keep coming back to that scene because it kind of encapsulates a lot of the themes of the undercurrent of the book. But the scene in which the one character who is a life model is instead drawn as if they were making portraits of him. And he, you know, has a kind of emotional reaction to seeing the, you know, attempts at rendering a likeness. I think anybody who has gone through the process of sitting for a portrait and drawing a portrait and having that sort of intimacy where you're one to one with the person. And on the one hand, you're engaging in the most surface level possible thing because you're literally looking at their skin and their eyes and imagining the structure beneath them and trying to replicate that on a flat sheet of paper. On the other hand, you're having an intimate experience that is so similar to the intimacy that only a person in a couple would have when, you know, when you're face to face with them, like a couple in the earlier scene in the bed, and they're just a few inches away from each other, like staring directly into each other's eyes. And it's almost like that sort of like um, bifurcated experience of like the intimacy on the one hand and the sort of mechanical aspect in the other hand is sort of like the duality at the heart of some of the narratives in the story, where, you know, you feel like you know somebody because you know everything, right? On the other hand, they're always kind of unknowable because you're always looking at their veneer, you know. I wish I had said that as a question instead of a statement.
No, when I honestly think I got into comics and cartoons because I liked figure drawing. And if growing up in Richmond, Virginia, and they're not going to museums or galleries, comics was the place for figure drawing and cartoons. And the superhero figuration thing, like they're practically nude in their outfits, and it's just a great display of weird, funky figure drawing, like weird mannerist drawing of like the 90s cartoonists. And so then in high school, I went to the local college. They had like so I got to draw from nude models really, really young. The drawing the figure, like what you're saying, is like you were a model too, so that kind of end of it. But for many years, it's just clinical, and you're just trying to figure out how to draw an elbow, and that's it. So then writing some of these things from the model's point of view of like they're feeling like there's some kind of tension in the room, or all of this, that I think that's something that maybe only someone who's done it would sense. And it has that feeling of like you're not supposed to say it, but it's kind of there. And so so I put it in I put it in the book, because that's where you put things that you feel like you're maybe not supposed to say out loud.
If you put them in another character's mouth, yeah.
It doesn't have to be another character. It just has to be printed in the book.
Yeah.
Like, this is where all of the shit goes.
How old were you when you were going to those figure drawing classes?
Yeah, I mean, like 16 or something. It was through. I went to like I ended up going to a few different high schools over my high school period, but one of them was the Center for the Arts, Henrico High School. And so I think through that they were like, well, the local college has an alumni drawing night that you can go to. And I also had a lot of different kinds of drawing teachers, and the one that is kind of, so the teacher in this book is not any one teacher that I had. It's sort of kind of an amalgamation of things, but the personality is more like this one guy that taught a very like Russian style, like one pose for and I was one of, he only had like two models. That I kind of got to know this teacher really well, because he only had a couple models, because it would be the same sitting pose for a whole semester. And it was a very like academic form of drawing. Whereas at SVA, I had James McMullen, who did a great book called High Focus Drawing, and a lot of great cartoonists had him as a teacher. And he would only like, it would be 20-minute max poses, and that was his just his style. But his style was very long crits. The crits were like epic, like I wish I had just recorded them, because they just would be these like sprawling, bizarre, performance pieces, and I was very, very into it. Like I think I took one of his classes, and then I audited the other one, and then I had another teacher. I was because I basically just wanted to learn how to draw the figure well, and that I kind of figured that was kind of like the point of going to art school for me. And I had the painting teacher that a lot of Steve Assell, that many SVA students had, that taught very like immediate wet on wet painting, and his style was that he would paint, and the students would just watch him, and you'd kind of like learn to paint like Steve Assell. And I can see like students, like I can spot if they had taken his class. But I like that, because I kind of like tangibly learning something from a class. So even if you then have to then not paint like Steve Assell, but at least you learn something in that class.
Yeah.
Because other classes would just be like, not like that.
Yeah.
No, well, I mean, part of what I was asking is,
Yeah.
I was just trying to get at, like, if asking Dash, like, if that original interest in art, you keep going back to, I wanted to get really good at the figure. Was that the initial interest, or was that a tool towards comics? Like, what age did you get into art? How did that lead to comics? What's the
I
path?
always liked comics. I grew up with a lot of comics around the house. Like my dad was a comics reader, and he was very, in retrospect, he was very knowledgeable and hip to it. Like meaning he knew, like, of course he was into like Watchmen and stuff, but he also had a box of stoner comics, and he was in San Francisco during all of that, and he was kind of a hippie, so he was kind of, he was very into like alternative kind of like exploitation movies, and you'd have to get like Hong Kong movies on VHS then, and he was into that. And so but the Japanese comics felt new, and they were really exciting, and so I would go to Otakon, and I was more, from talking to people that like Austin English, who's my age, he was very hip to the Fact Sheet 5 kind of small press scene. And I think I was not hip to that in the 90s. I was more just into anime and manga in the 90s. And it was, I've now loved John Porcellino and all, but I only saw those later. I wasn't hip to it at the time. At the time, I was going to anime conventions and into Guyver. And but I also I loved Tezuka immediately, and I got, whenever there's like the very first English Adolf books came out, I got
with
those
the photo covers.
Yeah. I think in retrospect, those were trying to kind of like capitalize on the success of Mouse or something like that. They would pick
that makes
pick
sense.
those covers and put those out.
I think Tezuka's an interesting touch point given the earlier subject matter of the conversation. Because he uses caricature so effectively. On the other hand, he is almost always like trying to tell really humane stories that, even when it's wildly caricatured, or really, really like sort of like flattens out certain kinds of things, he also enables characters to have depth and have,
Yeah, I mean, the author character in this book, I feel she has this really ridiculous hairstyle that I think of as being like a Tezuka thing,
right,
where it's like not a real hairstyle, but it's just sort of like a marker of who that person is. And a lot of manga and anime are like that, where it's like the hair design and the hair color is character building. At this point, I kind of don't. It's just sort of in the in my I didn't it just kind of came out that way, and I kind of later think, oh, that's sort of like a Tezuka thing.
right. The other two cartooning influences I was curious to ask you, like point blank, like the sense of time and organized space and as relation to time gave me a little bit of a Yokoyama Yuichi feel, but I also, obviously I'm primed to think that because, you obviously like him already, and so I think associate the two of you, with each other. I mean, obviously his stuff is, one of the characters nearly quotes him at one point, with the
what is that?
Oh, I should have written down the page. Something about observing things like a bird would.
Oh yeah, that seems to kind of his. That I didn't intentionally. Well, I love Yokoyama. To I think probably you're right that this comics critic Greg Hunter, he wrote a book that was like a critical survey of my work that Uncivilized Books published is in their critical cartoons line. And he really, and I wasn't involved in that book. I felt like I should read it. You know? And it was a weird, you know, it was obviously like kind of a weird experience to read it, but he mentions Yokoyama kind of throughout. I don't really remember thinking about Yokoyama, especially not around like Bottomless and New School and those things.
Right.
I kind of think of finding Yokoyama later.
Right.
And I'm sure there's someone else could probably point to it better than me, of absorbed from Yokoyama. But for me, it was that action was somehow meaningful in and of itself.
Right.
And that I'd seen that before in like Matt Brinkman or even Jim Woodring, where it's like just a character doing something. And like this comic is profound just by watching this being doing this thing. Even Jack Kirby comics are often like that, right? Where it's like, okay, Silver Surfer, like who the hell knows what is really happening? This is kind of just about Silver Surfer moving through space, and it's powerful from that. But like I remember when I did a movie called My Entire High School Sinking in the Sea, and in the climax of it, there's characters that are moving up, they're climbing up the insides of bleachers. And I remember thinking like it can kind of exit an action movie and just like they climb bleachers for way too long than logically they would be climbing it. And I thought that that's like a Yokoyama thing, that somehow he'll have a character doing something and it sort of exits the communication part of doing something, and it has a kind of extra meaning that is maybe like you're watching like a nature documentary of something, or yeah, like you're seeing it from a different animal's point of view,
Like a profundity that's suggested by the fact that you're still watching it. Like just the fact that you're even just doing it must mean that it means something.
Well, like my favorite one is Travel, and that feels like you're watching some aliens have made a movie about humans, and this is it. Why are these humans shuffling through these spaces and sitting down, and it is like that figure drawing what he says, where yeah, like how does a bird see, how does some alien being see us, an insect. That's a lot of like science fiction perspective of how does a truly alien being kind of like communicate with us or see us.
And then how do you, because that's such a funny thing to balance against like the deeply human stuff that we were talking about earlier, that to kind of be operating in both of those at the same time is really curious.
Well, like I probably in this like a Yokoyama thing is like, you know, they in Blurry is one character spends so long thinking about which flavor of ice cream to get, and she like flips a coin and you're looking at the coin, but it's pages like that's kind of
Right.
but that's also very you know, a lot of like basically Japanese comics are like decompressed time comics, have that a little bit, but Yokoyama obviously like had his own unusual perspective. Like I think one of my favorite things, I don't even know if it was in an interview or I can't remember. I think of his interviews as being usually very like he's not giving you anything. It's like yes or no, or there's like a Warholian, at least for the couple that I've read. But maybe Dan Nadell or someone told me at some point that like he bought like a how to draw manga book when after he was a painter, and to me that's like a perfect. That's like, oh, like, you know, how do I fix my car or something? Like I guess I'll get a book and like, okay, they have panels, and you know, some art comics feel that me, like I see some new comics now where it feels like, okay, they're coming from a different perspective, and they kind of are like, okay, I guess comics have word balloons, and that's cool for me to read. But you know, like obviously I'm so 3000% like a comics person. Like I've only read comics or been interested in comics my whole life. So I have no how to draw a comic. You know?
So I have one question that I got to ask for my own personal sake before we go here. It's something that I think me and Brandon tried to record a Formalism Friday on it, and the conversation just went so strangely, so I figured we go to the source. I have forever been fascinated by your use of like screened looking images, like screen print looking images in your work, and especially when you'll do like completely painted images and put like line art on top of it, or you'll do things like in New School where it looks, yeah, just like a screen printed gradient, or you'll do these colors in the background. Visually, they've always like really slapped me across the face, been visually really impactful, influenced my thinking a lot. But I've never like been able to be like, what made him choose to do this? What's he trying to get across with this? But it's something that showed up in a few of your works across time.
And
And
how
again,
dare
it's
you? Yeah.
no, it's just it's visually
Yeah.
has been so influential to me, but I don't know what it's about. So I'm just curious.
I kind of think what you're talking about is when the color, like I was doing kind of like color coding things for a while, where
Hmm.
like those things were in Moam, where it'd be like literally like kind of like you could track the yellows through something, or that it had like a meaning that you could locate. And then around 2010ish, it kind of turned into this thing where there would be color fields that did not align with the line art, and I think that's what you're talking about. And
Yeah.
the parallel to a lot of these was I was making cartoons, and in 2010 I went to the actually I think the first time I did that actually was Strange Tales in 2009. That was actually riffing on misaligned printing, and it was a Spider-Man comic, and it was kind of about, because you'd look at like old comics and be like, well, it would just be a solid blue field over a face, and why, that's so crazy. um, but uh, but it's because they were coloring them very quickly, and they were kind of slapdash, and they kind of arrived at very expressionistic coloring that looks great. Also, around that time, I went to the Sundance Labs, and one of them was the Composers Lab, where I was the director, but they would have groups of composers, and they would score one scene. They would score the same scene from all these different composers would score the same scene. And I started to think about the color of the comic as really like the score, and the line art as the content. Because you can follow what's happening in a comic from the line art.
Hmm.
If you draw a tree, it doesn't have to be brown and green. It's a tree. It can be purple. It could be anything. So I was thinking about film scores, and especially very like Bernard Herrmann scores, like really in your face scores, where there's an abstract element that's huge, that's in your face, like you know this woman's in the shower, but also rain, 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 this really abrasive thing. And so then the abstract sound paired with the concrete content of the scene equals the third thing. That was really, really exciting, and it had like, there were things like um, Sigmar Polke did things that, and Gary Panner, like the back covers of the Gary Panner Jimbos had kind of things like that. I would do things where it'd be like, it would feel like it was kind of aligned with things in some other, like it was not the obvious alignment of two things. So like the panels would be like this, but I would have the color field just go an inch over so that it was aligning with some other thing. And the idea was that it's making a third thing that's an emotional trip, like a film score. Yeah, it was. I mean, I was like on cloud nine, kind of coming up with these things, and then it kind of turned into things like in Doctors, where each page was a different single color.
Hmm.
Yeah, it kind of morphed. It was especially interesting in that Sundance Labs, because normally you don't see one scene scored by a dozen different people,
Hmm.
and they would even do things like, well, you score the scene from this character's point of view, and you score it from this other character's point of view.
Mm.
And it would change. It would alter the content of the scene, where it was like, well, it used to be about this guy, but now it's about this other person in the scene that we didn't know was going to be the main character. It was a bit of an experiment because they're occupying the same field, unlike a score versus the picture. I think if you get on the wavelength of it, it's like enjoyable. And another thing that I've kind of noticed is that I'll do some of those coloring things in cartoons, and my cartoons get called psychedelic all the time. But people didn't take New School or those comics to be psychedelic. I think they usually think of them like kind of maybe like what you were talking about, where it's like you're trying to kind of puzzle out why. Like there's some kind of conceptual reason.
Well, I think what causes that is because you do go out of your way sometimes. Like you said, you'll go over a panel and then you'll align it with something in the other panel. So even though those could be purely just visual things that you're doing, and the sense comes across that it's mostly an emotive like soundtrack thing, but then there's those things that seem much more intentional, like I'm purposely going to extend this an inch. And I think that's where the sense of like some kind of tighter relationship between the other thing that it made me think of that really influenced me was thinking about the page as like layered Photoshop layers or something that we could approach a page. So when there started to be some kind of seemingly obvious relationship between the layers, then it's tempting to think that there may be some interpretive content there rather than just emotive content.
Well, I mean, it was really fun making that, because there'd be two separate sheets, but I asked Fantagraphics to not do extra dense black ink. I asked them make it a black ink, but you can still see what's the color underneath.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you know, on a home printer, like I would work on it, and on a home printer, it would be one field. But I knew from my Photoshop file that this, photo of a flower in the background would align with this person tearing this thing down. And it would be like exciting to see that it would be stamped one on top of the other, and that there would be these connections that would be exciting, and not just seem like again, like people never took it as a psychedelic thing, as like just a big mess around it. But I like Polke is very psychedelic, and there's Francis Picabia, who I really love, and a lot of those are like drawings on top of each other, and there's some relationship between them that is poetic, but also sometimes like kind of frustrating. You're like, well, why is this drawing of a bird on top of this face? Like, what? I say the word poetic because there's some like rhyming that equals some third thing that ideally is part of the story or part of what you're going after, and it's not just being confusing.
And that's like the magic. That's what was so inspiring about it to me. That's one of the things I'm looking for in art, is trying to get that synergy where we're getting a third or a fourth thing where we only have two. That seems one of the magic goals that we're chasing.
That's every comic, the words plus the pictures equal a new thing. This picture next to that picture equals a new thing. So you're trying to make alignments that and then around, I think maybe around that time, I was trying to like see the edge of how different can you put things next to each other. But even in Blurry, at some point working on Blurry, I thought, like, if it stays inside of this grid, I can kind of do anything. I remember thinking that. And like, there's photos in Blurry, and I had them in there, and I thought, well, I could print them out and trace them to have it be more aligned with the rest. Like at one point she goes to a dictionary, and it's obviously like a photo of a dictionary. And why did I use a photo instead of like just copying the photo and stick it in? It just felt like a very specific real thing. It helped to me add a level of realism of ideally it felt like these things they're mundane enough, and this is specific enough of a book to have like actually happened.
Well, and it is also a fantastic book, and I hope that everyone will pick up a copy because it is available now and is a hell of a read. And also is really challenging in really great ways. Like it feels like a really easy read in a certain kind of way, but also like I said, like you trust your audience, which I really appreciate. Like that is I think a characteristic that is increasingly rare over time. A trust in the audience.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Carson.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.